I sat in the lawyer's office, hands folded tight in my lap, as my father's will was read aloud. The room smelled like polished wood and coffee that had gone cold. My brother leaned back in his chair like he already knew how this would end. My stepmother sat beside him, calm and still, but her eyes kept flicking toward me. Primary residence, Aspen property, and all investment portfolios, to my son. My brother didn't react. He just nodded like it was expected. Business shares, transferred in full. Again, no surprise. Then the lawyer paused. He reached for a thin envelope and slid it toward me. For Kathy, a parcel of farmland located in Red Creek County. Silence filled the room. I stared at the paper. Farmland? That's it. I asked quietly. The lawyer cleared his throat. That is what is stated here. I felt my stepmother watching me too closely. Waiting. I nodded slowly. Okay. My voice didn't shake. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just accepted it. But deep inside, something felt wrong. My father would never have done this. And somehow, I knew this wasn't the whole story. We walked out of the office together, but no one spoke. Outside, the sun was too bright. It didn't match how I felt. My brother checked his phone like nothing had happened. My stepmother adjusted her purse and smiled, but not at me. That smile stuck with me. It wasn't relief. It was satisfaction. You handled that well, my brother said, finally glancing at me. Could have been messy. I nodded. Yeah. He gave a small laugh. Dad knew what he was doing. That was the moment something clicked. No. He didn't. My father had always been careful, thoughtful, precise. He explained everything. He never left things unclear. But that will? It didn't sound like him. I replayed the words in my head. The tone. The structure. Something was missing. Or worse, something had been changed. I looked at my stepmother again. She caught my eyes this time. And she didn't look away. She just smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile. That was when the thought hit me hard. What if this wasn't my father's will at all? I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions. That was the part that surprised them the most. By that evening, I had packed my things. Not much, just clothes, some old notebooks, and a box of photos my father once gave me. My brother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You're really leaving? He asked. I zipped my bag. Yeah. He shrugged. Honestly, probably for the best. No point fighting something you can't change. I looked at him. I'm not fighting. He smirked. Smart. That word sat wrong with me. Not because he said it, but because he thought he understood me. I walked past him without another word. No goodbye. No drama. Just silence. As I drove away from the only home I had known, my chest felt tight. Not because I had lost everything, but because I knew something had been taken from me, and I wasn't ready to prove it. Not yet. The farmland was worse than I imagined. It took me 3 hours to get there. The road turned from pavement to dirt long before I arrived. When I stepped out of my car, the wind hit me first, dry, empty, quiet. The land stretched out in front of me. Overgrown grass, broken fence posts, a leaning barn that looked ready to collapse. This is it, I whispered. It felt forgotten, abandoned, worthless. I walked through the field slowly. My shoes sank into uneven ground. The air smelled like dust and old wood. But something didn't feel random. My father wasn't careless. He wouldn't leave me with nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the land, trying to understand, trying to feel what he had seen. Because he had seen something. He must have. I turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. And that was when I felt it. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. Because deep down I knew one thing for sure. This land wasn't given to me by accident. That night, I slept in my car. There was no power in the house. No water. Just silence and the sound of wind brushing through dry grass. I stared at the ceiling of my car and tried to make sense of everything. And then I remembered something. Years ago, my father and I had been driving through a small town. He had pointed at an empty lot, nothing but weeds and dirt. See that, he said. I nodded. Most people would walk right past it. Because it's nothing, I had said. He smiled.
No.
Because they don't look closely enough. I turned to him. What do you mean? The things people ignore, he said, are usually the most valuable. That memory hit me hard. I sat up in the car, and for the first time, I looked at the land differently. Not as something I had been given, but as something I had been trusted with. What if this wasn't a loss? What if I just didn't understand it yet? The next morning I started cleaning. It wasn't glamorous. I pulled weeds, cleared trash, and opened the old barn that creaked like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, dust covered everything. Broken tools, old crates, rusted metal. But in the corner, I found something different. A toolbox. It was heavier than it should have been. When I opened it, my hands froze. Inside were papers, neatly folded, protected, property maps, survey notes, and my father's handwriting. I sat on the ground and started reading. Numbers, boundaries, notes about soil quality. But one line stood out. Water access confirmed beneath North Ridge. I looked up slowly. Water? On this land? My heart started to beat faster. This wasn't random. This was planned. But planned for what? I didn't leave after that. I stayed. It wasn't a big decision. It was quiet, simple. I had nowhere else to go, and now I had a reason to stay. The land wasn't worthless. It just needed work. A lot of work. I used what little money I had to buy basic supplies. I fixed part of the fence, cleaned a section of the house, made it livable.
Barely.
At night, I sat with my father's notes spread out in front of me. He had studied this land. He had invested in it. And somehow no one else knew. Not my brother. Not my stepmother.
Just me.
That thought gave me something I hadn't felt since the will reading.
Control.
I looked out across the field. This is mine, I said quietly. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. The first year was the hardest. I worked part-time jobs in nearby towns just to survive. Cleaning, stocking shelves, anything I could find. During the day, I worked the land. It fought me at every step. The soil was tough. The weather unpredictable. The house needed repairs I couldn't afford. There were nights I sat on the floor and wondered if I had made a mistake. If I should have fought back. If I should have stayed. But then I would look at the papers again. At my father's notes. And something inside me refused to quit. No one from my family called. Not once. It was like I had disappeared. And maybe in their world, I had. But out here, I was building something. Slowly. Quietly. And even though it didn't look like much yet, I knew one thing. This land was starting to change. And so was I. The breakthrough came by accident. I had been digging near the North Ridge, following one of my father's notes. The ground felt different there. Darker, softer. Then I hit moisture. At first, I thought it was just damp soil. But when I dug deeper, water started to rise.
Clean. Steady.
My hands shook. This land had a natural water source. That changed everything. I spent weeks testing the soil, researching crops, talking to local farmers. That was when I learned something no one else had noticed. This land wasn't just usable. It was rare. The soil had a unique composition that made it perfect for high-value crops. Crops that could sell for 10 times the usual price. I stood in the field, looking out over the land. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt lucky, because what they gave me was worth more than they ever understood. My first harvest wasn't big, but it was enough. I sold my crops at a local market. People noticed the quality immediately. "Where do you grow this?" one man asked. "Here," I said. He looked surprised. "That land? No way." I just smiled. By the end of the day, everything was gone. I sat in my car afterward, counting the money. It wasn't a lot, but it was real. Proof. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. I was right, I whispered. The land worked. And if it worked once, it could work again. But as I drove back that evening, something stayed in my mind. If this was just the beginning, then what else had my father hidden here? As the seasons changed, I kept digging deeper, both in the soil and in my father's notes. The more I read, the more I realized something important. This wasn't luck. It was design. There were small improvements across the land that I hadn't noticed at first. Drainage adjustments.
Soil treatments.
Markers buried under fence lines. He had been working on this long before he died. Quietly.
Carefully.
And he had never told anyone. Not even me. That realization sat heavy in my chest. He didn't leave me nothing. He left me something hidden. Something only I would find. I folded one of the maps and held it tightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Because if he had, it wouldn't have stayed mine. Once I understood what the land could do, everything changed. I stopped thinking small. I expanded carefully, adding more crops, improving irrigation, reinvesting every dollar I made. I didn't rush. That was the key. I had learned that from him. Slow growth. Strong foundation. People in the area started to notice. Some offered advice. Others offered deals. I turned most of them down. Not because I didn't need help, but because I didn't trust anyone yet. This wasn't just business. This was something bigger. Something I was building from the ground up. At night, I would stand outside and look over the land. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But one thought kept coming back. If my father had planned all this, then he must have known something was coming. Years passed and I stopped thinking about them. At least, that's what I told myself. But every now and then, I would hear things. My brother's business was growing, expanding into new states, new deals, new investments. My stepmother appeared in magazines, charity events, smiling like everything was perfect. They had everything. The house, the money, the status. And me? I was just a name they didn't mention anymore. But that was fine. Because while they were busy being seen, I was busy building something real. Quietly.
Steadily.
And the best part? They had no idea. They thought the story had ended the day I walked away. They thought they had already won. But I wasn't gone. I was just out of sight. One evening, while organizing old documents, I found something I had missed before. A small notebook, tucked between pages of survey maps. Inside, my father had written short entries.
Notes.
Numbers. And then, near the back, one line stood out. Truth hidden in numbers. I read it again.
And again.
What did that mean? I flipped through the pages more carefully this time. The numbers weren't random. They were patterns.
Dates.
Transfers. References.
My heart started to race.
This wasn't about the land anymore. This was about something else. Something bigger. I sat back slowly, staring at the notebook. If there was truth hidden in these numbers, then maybe, just maybe, there was proof. It took me months to piece it together. I cross-referenced the numbers with old records I could access. Public filings. Business timelines. Property changes. Slowly, a picture started to form. Something didn't match. The timeline of my father's assets didn't line up with the will. Some things had been moved right before his death.
Too neatly. Too conveniently.
I sat at my desk, staring at the papers spread out in front of me. Someone changed something, I said under my breath. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. And that was the problem. Everything I had pointed to something wrong, but nothing I had could prove it outright.
Not yet.
I leaned back and closed my eyes. I wasn't ready to act, but I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew, and that changed everything. By the 5th year, the land had become a business. By the 7th, it had become a name. And by the 10th, it had become something bigger than I ever imagined. I wasn't just growing crops anymore. I was running a full operation, distribution, partnerships, contracts. Everything was clean, documented, solid. People respected what I built, not because I came from money, but because I didn't. And through all of it, I stayed quiet. No interviews, no attention, just work. Because I remembered what it felt like to have everything taken. And I wasn't about to let that happen again. I looked out over the fields one morning and smiled. I wasn't the same person who had stood there 10 years ago. Not even close. And, for the first time, I knew I didn't need anything from them. The first sign came through a news article. A short piece about financial strain in a regional company. My brother's company. I read it twice. Then again. Unexpected losses, delayed projects, or restructuring. That didn't sound like success. I leaned back in my chair, thinking, for years, everything had gone perfectly for them. Too perfectly. Now, cracks were showing. I didn't feel happy. Not exactly. But I felt something else. Recognition. Because I knew that kind of pressure. And I knew what it could do. I folded the paper slowly. Something was changing. And somehow, I had a feeling they would come looking for me. The call came on a quiet afternoon. I almost didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number. Hello. There was a pause. Then his voice. Kathy. I froze. 10 years. And that was all he said. Yeah, I replied. You sound good. I am. Another pause. I've been meaning to reach out, he said. I didn't respond. Because I knew. This wasn't about me. So, he continued. How's the land? There it was. I looked out the window at the field stretching wide and full. It's doing fine. He cleared his throat. Good. That's good. Silence filled the line again. Then he said it. We should talk. I smiled slightly. Now I knew. This wasn't a call. It was a need. We met a week later. He didn't come alone. Of course he didn't. My stepmother sat beside him, dressed perfectly, like nothing had changed. But I saw it. The tension. The edge. They weren't as comfortable as they used to be. We've been watching your progress, she said smoothly. I raised an eyebrow. Have you? She smiled. We're proud of you. That almost made me laugh. My brother leaned forward. Let's be direct. We need liquidity. There it was. We want to buy the land, he said. I looked at him. At both of them. And for the first time in 10 years, they were asking me for something. They made their offer like they were doing me a favor. A large number. More money than I had ever seen at once. But I didn't react. Because I knew something they didn't. It wasn't enough. Not even close. This is generous, my stepmother added. I nodded slowly. It is. My brother smiled, relieved. So we have a deal? I leaned back in my chair. No. The word landed quietly. But it hit hard. His smile faded. What do you mean? I said calmly. It's not for sale. My stepmother's eyes narrowed slightly. You're being emotional. I shook my head. No. I'm being informed. That was when I saw it. The shift. They still thought they were in control. But they weren't. Not anymore. We sat there in silence for a moment. Then my brother tried again. Look, we're offering you security. Stability. I almost smiled. I have that already. My stepmother leaned forward. You don't understand what you're turning down. I looked at her directly. I understand exactly. She didn't like that. I could see it. You've always been difficult, she said. There it was. The same tone. The same dismissal. 10 years later, nothing had changed. Except me. I'm not difficult, I said quietly. I just don't agree with you. My brother sighed. You're making a mistake. I stood up. No, I said. I made a mistake 10 years ago. They both froze. Because now, we were finally talking about it. I've been looking into the will, I said. The room shifted instantly. My stepmother's face stayed calm, but her hands tightened slightly. What about it? She asked. I found inconsistencies. My brother frowned. What are you talking about? I reached into my bag and placed a few papers on the table. Timelines. Transfers. Numbers that don't match. Silence. You're imagining things, she said quickly. I shook my head. No. I looked at her directly. I'm understanding them. That was when I saw it. Fear. Small. Brief. But real. You don't have proof, my brother said. I didn't answer right away. Because he was right. Not fully. Not yet. But I had enough. Enough to ask questions. Enough to cause problems. And that was all I needed. I didn't fight the will, I said slowly. They both watched me now.
Carefully.
Not because I believed it, I continued, but because I needed time. My brother's jaw tightened.
For what? He asked.
I smiled slightly. To build something that didn't depend on you. Silence. To understand what was really taken. My stepmother said nothing, because now, she knew. This was never just about the land, I said. It was about the truth. And for the first time since I walked into that room, they didn't have an answer. I'm not selling, I said firmly. My brother stood up. You don't have a choice. I looked at him calmly. I do. My stepmother's voice was cold now. You're making this worse for yourself. I shook my head.
No.
I'm ending it. I gathered my papers. I have everything I need, I added. They both froze. Because now, they understood. Not fully, but enough. You wouldn't, my brother said quietly. I met his eyes. I don't have to. That was the truth. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to destroy them. Because they were already falling. And I was already standing. I walked out without looking back. The air outside felt lighter.
Cleaner.
For 10 years, I had carried that moment in the lawyer's office with me. The silence. The betrayal. The question of why. Now, I didn't need the answer anymore. Because I had something better. Proof of who I was. Proof of what I built. The land stretched out before me when I got home. Strong.
Full. Alive.
Just like everything I had created. They gave me the smallest piece. The one they thought didn't matter. And somehow, it became everything. Not because of what it was, but because of what I made it. And that was something no one could take from me again.